Just to remind everybody, we've done some previous videos where we talked about the liquid bucket and the income bucket. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of the growth bucket and what the rules are for the growth bucket. But I want to remind everybody that what we encourage everyone to do is take all of your assets, combine all the numbers, come up with one number wherever it's at, and then we're going to fill up these buckets in order. The first thing we're going to do is find out how much money should we really have in the liquid bucket. Whatever we don't use there, we're going to figure out how much money goes into the income bucket. Our previous video, we talked about how you solve for the number that goes in that income bucket. But whatever we don't use in the liquid bucket and we don't put in the income bucket now is available for this growth bucket. And ultimately, if you've listened to the previous videos, here we are taking basically little to no risk. We want to make sure that no matter what, you have this money available for the next 3 to 5 years for your emergency fund. We want to make sure that this is guaranteed, if at all possible, for as long as you're living. It eliminates a lot of the risk. So little to no risk here, but this is the money that you can and should have at risk in retirement. One of the things that I see a lot of people do, a mistake that I feel a lot of people make is they tend to get too conservative with all of their money because they don't have a plan. They're trying to draw an income stream, keep their money liquid, and grow it in one portfolio. If you do that, it's not efficient, it costs too much, and you're going to tend to be more conservative than you need to be. What we want everyone to do is get very conservative with these numbers, but you can stay aggressive with this number. There is no reason why someone who's 75, 80 years old still can't be in a portfolio that is 75% stocks. Okay, you can do that only if you've done planning here. So let me talk to you about the growth bucket today. So in the growth bucket, again, this is money that we've already determined we don't need for the next 5 years. It's also money we've determined we don't need to produce an income stream. So therefore, it's money that I don't need for 5 years or longer. So I'm going to start by writing something down here that I want everyone to make sure we understand. And that's what we have what we call a 5-year rule. And that is only take diversified risk with money that you don't need for 5 years or longer. So when you do the planning like this, what we know is that the money that goes in this growth bucket, you don't need for 5 years or longer, unless there's an emergency, an unforeseen thing happens, because if you need it within 5 years, it's here. If you needed it for income, it's here. So therefore, we have what you need in order to be successful in stock market investing. That is time and discipline. We don't need this money for 5 years or longer. What does that mean? That means you need to first determine what your rate of return goal is. What is the rate of return goal now for this portfolio? So for example, we know that if you're going to leave this money in the growth bucket, it needs to beat inflation. So we know that number one, it's got to at least beat inflation. Number two, if this money's for long-term care, then we know it's got to beat inflation for long-term care rates. If we want it to produce a greater income stream later because of inflation and those kinds of things, this account really needs to grow. In previous videos, Marvin, we've talked about not letting your portfolio take a hit. And that stands for healthcare, inflation, and taxes. And this is really where in the growth bucket, we want to make sure that this is where we're beating inflation. This is where we're covering ourselves if we need more income to cover increased healthcare costs. If taxes increase, that's where we do it. So the rate of return is important when we get out here. Number two, this is where we choose asset allocation. And this is where we also want to diversify. One of the biggest mistakes I see, financial advisors make, people will go to someone, even financial advice, is they go directly into a risk profile questionnaire. People answer this risk profile questionnaire based on this, and that's the mistake. If you answer your risk profile questionnaire knowing you need money liquid and an income, you're going to answer that questionnaire a lot differently than if you're going to answer that question only based on that bucket. Now, all of a sudden, your risk tolerance is a lot greater when you know these two are covered. And so then your asset allocation may be more towards stocks than it normally would be. You're going to diversify that portfolio, which means to minimize the risk. And here, we want to take the least amount of risk to get to that rate of return. I mentioned in a previous video that the income bucket, the goal is the least amount of assets. In the growth bucket, it's the least amount of risk. If the goal here is to get 7% per year, There are risky ways to get 7% a year, and there's least risky ways. This is where we really want to focus on taking the least amount of risk to get that rate of return. This is where standard deviation matters. This is where a risk profile questionnaires matter. One other thing that's very important about the growth bucket, and that is this right here. This is liquid. Really, Marvin, one of the big things about the 3-bucket approach is knowing which ones are liquid and which ones are not. The liquid bucket, obviously, they're and available. We're not going to tie that up. Income bucket is not liquid. Whatever money we put in here has to be locked up for all practical purposes. It's gone. For the purpose of an income stream, you can't touch it. But the growth bucket, you can touch. So the whole point is that this continues to grow. And over time, if I use my emergency fund, if I spend the money in the next 3 to 5 years that I had planned to spend, I'm always going to ask myself, do I have planned purchase or expenses for the next 3 to 5 years? I'm going to take money out of my growth bucket and I'm going to refill the liquid bucket. And then in 5 years from now, if inflation has really kicked in and this income stream I'm getting is not meeting my needs to cover my expenses, I can take money from this growth bucket and add it to my income bucket and get more of an income stream. So the whole goal of the growth bucket is to continue to fill these up over time, and this continues to grow. This is the only bucket that you can and can't afford to have risk. So think about this. If you're in retirement, you should know why you have this much money in the bank. You should know why you have this much, let's say, in an annuity, guarantee you an income stream. You should know why you have this much at risk. If the money at risk in the stock market has nothing to do with this or this, you're going to be comfortable. It doesn't matter how it performs today, this week, this month, this year. What matters is how this performs over 5 years. And so all throughout your retirement, you always have these 3 buckets. You only take a risk with the money you can afford to have that risk, but you can have it at risk. Even in the most aggressive portfolios, even in all equity portfolios over every rolling 5-year period, it's never had a negative return. So that's why we look at it and say we're safe as long as the money you have in the stock market at risk is money that we don't need for 5 years or longer. If it's already 5 years or less, it's here. If it's income, it's here. This is liquid. You can take it. You can need if you need it for emergencies. If you need it to fill these things, it is available. So we're not going to lock that up, tie that up. It's available for retirement.